So just to recap, we've been talking about advice to the government that has had them saying to the Australian public that it was too late, the aircraft weren't safe, and that they're not the right platform. We've subsequently established that the comments made by the Deputy Prime Minister that those parts have since been stripped was not accurate, and that the aircraft are in fact safe, as demonstrated by NHI and other operators. I'd like to come to the third part. Senator Wong, in question time last week, said, and I quote, "The advice from Defence was clear that this was not the right platform for Ukraine, and Defence and the government made decisions on that basis." Who provided that advice to government, and on what basis?
May I just make an overarching remark before asking the officials to respond, Senator Fawcett? You commenced your question by characterising the evidence that was provided earlier. I don't think that that accurately characterises what was described to you. Officials, of course, are happy to put on the public record their understanding of the issues before you and respond to your questions, but I don't think it assists to then summarise their advice in a way that is inconsistent with the material that's actually before the committee.
So, Minister, thank you for that chiding.
Well, however, it's a challenge, isn't it? Because the officials have given
Minister,
advice.
you've asked previously not to be overtalked. Could I ask for the same courtesy? Thank you. The interaction highlighted that there were some concerns that it wasn't only mechanical parts, their electronic parts had been removed, countered by the fact that that's a standard part of maintenance procedures to remove, replace, that the Ukrainians have adapted to the same conditions with other advanced systems from other nations. So it's not too late. It's a factor, but it doesn't mean it's too late to consider it, which is the point that I'm making. But I would like to come to the third point. I'm interested as to who, from the point of view of what qualifications does someone here have to say that this is not the right platform for the Ukrainians when they have done their own analysis, spoken to their partners in Europe, and have decided that they would like to ask for it?
Senator, Lieutenant General Simon Stewart, Chief of Army, if I might start in terms of the frame, the thinking which underpin my part of the advice. 4 points, if I may. The first is around the substantive issue of gifting to Ukraine.
Can you pull the microphone a bit closer to yourself, or can the operator turn the volume up a bit?
How's that?
Much better, thank you.
The first of the 4 points I'd make is in relation to the issue of gifting to Ukraine. It's something we take very seriously, and I'll speak only for Army's contribution to that support for Ukraine. Two key parts. One is we've contributed over 517...
Sorry, excuse me, General Stewart, we have very limited time. I'm aware of what we've done in the past. I'm asking specifically about the Taipan and on what basis was the decision made it was not a suitable platform, and what the qualifications whoever made that decision had to make that.
Right, Senator, thanks. The point I was going to make was that we're looking for things that are going to be suitable for the task and sustainable. In the case of the MRH, and my understanding is the task was for a CASEVAC, a casualty evacuation platform. In my experience and my advice, it is not suitable for that task. You need to have a reliable aircraft for that task, and it needs to be dedicated. And that's based on our nearly 2 decades of experience with this platform and the performance of the system, which is consistent with all of the other user nations, which has seen an availability rate in the order of 40% across the global fleet. So our people, both uniformed and contractors, for nearly 2 decades, have worked exceptionally hard and done a phenomenal job to get the very best out of this system. That is the best that the system is capable of providing. One of the key problems challenges in the system, which is well documented and has been well discussed in this committee over a number of years, is the support system and the paucity of spare parts. That system, or that situation, and the paucity of spare parts has not changed. Thirdly, it's extremely expensive to operate. I think I gave testimony last time that was in the order of $45,000 per flight hour. It's actually well north of that now. And as General King, and I know you inherently understand, it's a complex system. So regardless of whether it's the ADF operating the aircraft, NATO partners or Ukraine, there is no evidence to suggest that the system would be able to perform any better than it currently has and provide any better than 40% availability. That is just not sufficient and doesn't provide the assurance for any commander if it was to be used for a Kazovac platform. In terms of the second part of your question...
Sorry, could I perhaps address that first part before we move on to the second? Could I ask that document 6 and document 2 be distributed, please? Document 6, which you'll get in a minute, is a document released by the New Zealand Defence Force under Freedom of Information, or their equivalent of it, and it highlights that they are getting over 70% availability, on average 6 out of 8 aircraft available for their usage, which is why they are very happy with the performance of the aircraft. That's a recent assessment of their availability. And document, the other one, document 2, is based on cabinet papers from New Zealand, and these were revealed by Radio New Zealand, highlighting that the New Zealanders deliberately chose to choose the same configuration as the Australians so that they would be able to share non-recurring engineering costs, etc. So we're talking about a near neighbour who is operating the same platform, I think bar the HMSD, I think they use ordinary NVGs, but essentially the same platform, which is capable of being configured with 12 stretchers in the aeromedical evacuation role, and they're getting over 70% availability, which I think is probably better than almost any other fleet that we have here in Australia. And that same document, document 3, highlights that they do it. In fact, sorry, it's document 5, if I could get that distributed as well, highlights that they do that with their deeper maintenance, the 600-hour maintenance, being done by a team of only 13 people, but that's done in accordance with Airbus procedures run by Airbus in one location, which is exactly what the Ukrainians have proposed in their request. So we have very clear evidence from our nearest neighbour that the same configuration of aircraft that we have, run in a maintenance program operated by Airbus, or predominantly by Airbus, in accordance with their procedures in one location, can get over 70% availability in an aircraft that can be configured to carry 12 casualties. Why is the Australian Defence Department advising government and saying to the public that it's not suitable when our nearest neighbour can achieve those kind of performance outcomes, and their model is what Ukraine is proposing to operate?
Thanks, Senator. We're not comparing like for like. So the calculation of availability in the instance of the New Zealand fleet does not count the aircraft that aren't in what I would characterise as the operational fleet. So what does that mean? If we put it in the Australian context, we would have to have an additional, I think it's in the order of 6 to 8 aircraft that aren't counted in terms of the rate of effort generation. In other words, if we were to compare on a like-for-like basis, we would need to have a bigger fleet, in other words, more aircraft available, but the availability statistics are only calculated on the smaller operational fleet.
General Stewart, the figures they provide break down into both availability and serviceability, and they highlight that their serviceability, I probably should have used that word, which is aircraft online available for them to use, is an average of 6 out of 8. The availability is actually higher than that, but their day-to-day serviceability for people to sign out and go flying, so for the Ukrainians to deploy on a AME mission is over 70%.
Senator, if I may, those aircraft, that's a representative of 8 aircraft across a worldwide fleet of just under 500 aircraft at the time. You know, I go back to the original equipment manufacturers' data around the rolling averages. Over the last 5 years, Senator, that fleet, worldwide fleet, has achieved between 35 and 42% availability, with the exception of a 3-month period. I think, you know, as well as that, in terms of Australia flying this aircraft, you know, in August 13, we became the world leader in terms of hours flown on this aircraft. Our 59,000 hours represents 15,000 hours more than any other country in the world. And so I think what I infer from your statements is that we don't know how to operate this aircraft. I think we do know how to operate this aircraft. We're very proud of what we've achieved, but we actually have not been able to achieve anywhere near the contracted capability. In terms of that New Zealand piece, there are some nuances in relation to how they operate the aircraft, but I think it's important to reflect on all of the operators and the chronic issues that everyone is dealing with, including New Zealand, around things like supply chain.
So, General King, thank you. I'm sure the Ukrainians will be happy to apply the same nuances that New Zealand do. I'd also point out, in terms of the global figures, after Norway ditched their fleet, and that's been frequently referred to, the Norwegians' equivalent of ANAO, or their internal review, highlighted that part of the problem with spares was that the Norwegian Defence Force hadn't actually ordered the spares that they needed, hence there were delays, and they said there's as much blame on the Norwegian side as there was on NH Industries' side. But the point is, if 8 aircraft were gifted to Ukraine, that they worked with their partners, as they've indicated they wish to operate in the same manner, with the same nuances, to use your word, as New Zealanders do, they would have a viable AME capability. Mr Moriarty, in an answer to Senator Reynolds about assistance to Ukraine and demining efforts, the quon that came back was that Defence has a range of mechanisms, including consultation with other government agencies and partner governments, to determine the most appropriate support to Ukraine. Now, clearly, there has not been consultation with Germany or France over this issue of the NH helicopter as a support for Ukraine. Before any further disassembly is done, given that the aircraft are not irrecoverable, given that they are safe to fly, and given that it is proven by a near neighbour that with certain nuances they can achieve over 70% serviceability and they're suitable for the AME task, will the government stop the removal of parts, consult, as per your stated process, with partner nations and Ukraine to see whether there is a will on behalf of Germany and France to support Ukraine as per their request, and then to gift them the existing aircraft in their existing state, so there's no more expenditure of resource and money required by the Australian Defence Department, so they can work with their European partners to establish whether it's 6 or 8 or 10 aircraft to actually save the lives of their troops, given that they are losing some 30,000 men wounded or killed every month, which is half the ADF, every month. Will the government commit to actually following its process, engage with partners and see what the art of the possible is before we just blindly proceed to dig a hole and bury these helicopters?
Senator Fawcett, what I can assure the committee is that we will continue to engage closely with the Ukraine contact group, where a number of the key partners of Ukraine internationally meet regularly to talk about Ukraine's requests and priorities. Those are discussed. That's General Campbell's participated in some of those conversations. The Deputy Prime Minister's contributed. We are actively engaged with the contact group to discuss and to work through Ukraine's priority requirements.
But have you raised the issue of Ukraine's request for Taipans and ascertained the willingness of those partners, who are the key shareholders and interested parties in the MRH or NH90 globally, as to whether they are happy to support Ukraine's request, as Ukraine has indicated that they are?
What I am prepared to say is that air support, including rotary wing, has been a topic of some discussion in the contact group.
All right, thank you very much. Now, just before I hand over to Senator Shoebridge, I understand, Senator Green, you had one clarifying question.
Thank you, Senator. Sorry, thank you, Chair. The MRH90 is obviously something I've learned a little bit about recently, being based up in North Queensland. But can I just ask, when did Defence first assess the option of providing MRH90 aircraft to Ukraine?
Bernard Phillip, First Assistant Secretary, International Policy. We received a letter from the Ukrainian government dated the 17th of December 2023. We received it on the 19th of December, and we worked across the Defence to assess that request, drawing upon Army Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group in terms of the operation of the platform, and within International Policy Division we worked through the international policy aspects of our support to Ukraine.
Just, sorry, Chair, on the list. No consideration was given by anybody at any time prior to that?
Senator, we regularly have discussions with the Ukrainian government, with the Ukrainian ambassador. We, as the Secretary mentioned, participate in the Ukraine Defence Contact Group. We work with other partners and are constantly assessing options to provide support to the Ukrainian government. In the course of discussions, I won't go into the details in terms of government-to-government discussions, but in the course of discussions with the Ukrainian ambassador on the 24th of October, he raised a range of possible options for support involving Australian Defence Force platforms that were in stages of disposal. We gave him an update on the status of the MRHR90 capability. It was not a formal request. We did not conduct a formal assessment at that time. As I say, we're constantly in the process of assessing options for support to Ukraine, and depending on how a proposal develops and where we fit that into our priorities, we will dedicate more resources to that assessment. As I mentioned earlier, a formal request didn't come until that letter of the 17th of December.
Does government ever
sorry,
get proactive
Senator
and
Birmingham,
think about
sorry, but
offering,
it's
not
not the
just waiting for a
Coalition's
request?
call. Lieutenant General, you had something to add, and then I'm just going back to Senator Lambie, who had one clarifying point, and then Senator Shoebridge, who's been very patient. So could you just please provide a very short response?
Just to add to my colleague's response to your question, Senator Birmingham, in May of 22, which coincided with a range of requests for gifting to Ukraine, but didn't include helicopters, we did look at and consider the option of gifting MRH, and for the reasons that we've been discussing,
All right.
that
Senator Lambie.
informed the advice.